The gunshot that killed her mother still echoed in Caroline Owens' nightmares. Though 3 years had passed since that terrible day when the Comanche raiders swept through their homestead like a plague of locusts. Now 18 years old, Caroline stood behind the counter of Henderson's General Store in Las Vegas, Nevada, her green eyes scanning every customer who entered with the wariness of a wild animal, her slender frame tensed for flight at the slightest sign of danger. The year was 1877, and the desert town sprawled across the valley like a collection of weathered bones, its buildings baked brown by the relentless sun that turned the surrounding landscape into waves of shimmering heat. "Miss Owens, I need 3 yards of that calico, Mrs." Henderson called from the back room, but Caroline barely registered the words. A tall man had just pushed through the door, his silhouette blocking the afternoon light, and her hand instinctively moved toward the knife she kept hidden in her skirt pocket. The man stepped forward, and she could finally see him clearly. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they seemed to fill the doorway, muscles straining against the worn fabric of his buckskin shirt. His hair fell past his collar in dark waves that looked like they had been cut with a hunting knife, and his face bore the weathered tan of someone who spent more time under the open sky than beneath any roof. His eyes, a startling shade of blue against his sun-darkened skin, swept the room before settling on her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I need supplies," he said, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "Enough for 2 months in the mountains." Caroline forced herself to release the knife handle and step forward, though every instinct screamed at her to run. "What do you need?" Her voice came out harder than she intended, clipped and cold. The man did not seem offended. He pulled a list from his pocket and laid it on the counter without moving closer, as though he understood that she needed space between them. "Flour, salt, coffee, beans, dried meat if you have it. Ammunition for a Winchester repeater, some fishing line and hooks." She took the list without letting her fingers touch his, scanning the items quickly. "This will take some time to gather. You can wait outside if you prefer." For the first time, something that might have been amusement flickered across his rugged features. "Name's Zachary Ingram." "Most folks call me Zach. I don't bite, miss." "I did not ask your name," Caroline replied, already turning toward the shelves that lined the walls. She could feel his gaze on her back as she worked, measuring out flour into a burlap sack, weighing it on the brass scales. Her hands shook slightly, and she hated herself for the weakness. "I know who you are," Zachary said quietly. "Caroline Owens, the girl who survived the raid on the Owens homestead. You have been living above this store for 2 years now, working for the Hendersons." She whirled around, the flour scoop gripped in her hand like a weapon. "How do you know that?" He held up his hands, palms out in a gesture of peace. "Easy now. This is a small town. People talk. I have been trapping in the mountains north of here for 5 years. I come down twice a year for supplies. I hear things." "Then you should know I do not discuss my past with strangers," Caroline said, forcing her voice to remain steady. She turned back to her work, adding salt and coffee to the growing pile of supplies on the counter. "Fair enough." Zachary did not push further. He stood quietly while she finished gathering everything on his list, counting out ammunition with practiced efficiency. When she finally tallied the cost, he paid in gold coins without haggling, which surprised her. Most mountain men tried to barter, claiming poverty even when their pockets jingled with nuggets panned from streams. "You will need help carrying this to your horse," Caroline said, more statement than offer. "I would appreciate that." Zachary gathered the heavier items while she took the smaller packages, and together they walked out into the blazing Nevada heat. His horse stood tied to the hitching post, a massive bay gelding that looked like it could carry a grizzly bear without complaint. The animal's coat gleamed with health, and its tack was well maintained despite obvious age and use. Caroline watched as Zachary loaded his supplies into the saddlebags with careful precision, balancing the weight evenly on both sides. His movements held an economy of motion that spoke of years of practice, and despite herself, she found her fear ebbing slightly. There was something solid about him, something that felt steady in a world that had proven itself catastrophically unstable. "Thank you for your help, Miss Owens," he said when everything was secured. He swung into the saddle with an ease that made it look effortless, though she knew the horse stood at least 16 hands high. "I will be back in the fall." She nodded curtly and turned to go back inside, but his voice stopped her. "For what it is worth, I am sorry about what happened to your family. No one should have to survive what you did." Caroline froze, her back to him, fighting the sudden burning in her eyes. She would not cry. She had not cried since the day she buried her mother and father in the hard desert soil. "Everyone has a sad story out here," she said flatly. "Mine is not special." "Maybe not," Zachary agreed, "but that does not make it hurt any less." She did not respond, just walked back into the store and let the door swing shut behind her. Through the window, she watched him ride north, his broad back straight in the saddle until he disappeared into the heat shimmer that made the desert dance. The summer passed in its usual rhythm of scorching days and slightly less scorching nights. Caroline worked in the store from dawn until dusk, sleeping in the small room above where the heat collected like water in a cistern. She spoke to customers only as much as business required, deflecting personal questions with the skill of long practice. Mrs. Henderson, a round woman with kind eyes and a persistent nature, had long since given up trying to draw Caroline out, though she still left little treats on the counter when she thought the girl was not looking. When autumn finally arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the occasional rain that turned the desert briefly green, Caroline found herself thinking about the mountain man more often than she cared to admit. She told herself it was only because his visit had been unusual, that his directness had caught her off guard. But sometimes, in the quiet moments before sleep, she remembered the way he had kept his distance without making it seem like rejection, the way his voice had held genuine sympathy without pity. On a crisp October morning, the door chimed and Zachary Ingram walked back into the store. He looked leaner than before, his face more weathered, but his eyes held the same startling blue intensity. This time, Caroline did not reach for her knife. "Good morning, Miss Owens," he said, removing his hat. "I need to restock for the winter." "Same as before?" she asked, already reaching for the flour bin. "Mostly. I will need more ammunition this time. There have been reports of a rogue grizzly in the high country. I want to be prepared." They fell into a rhythm, Caroline gathering supplies while Zachary waited patiently, occasionally commenting on the quality of the goods or asking about availability. His presence felt less threatening this time, or perhaps she was simply growing accustomed to it. "How was your summer?" he asked as she weighed out coffee beans. The question was so unexpected that she actually looked at him directly. "Why do you care?" "Because you are a person and I am making conversation," he replied, unruffled by her hostility. "If you would rather I stay silent, I can do that too." Caroline considered lying, then decided the truth was easier. "It was hot, boring, same as every summer here." She paused. "How was yours?" A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Cold at night in the mountains, even in summer. Quiet. I saw more animals than people, which is how I prefer it." "Why?" The question escaped before she could stop it. Zachary leaned against the counter, careful to maintain distance between them. I spent 5 years in the cavalry before I became a trapper, fought in campaigns I would rather forget, saw things that made me lose faith in humanity. The mountains do not lie, do not betray. A grizzly will kill you, but at least it is honest about its intentions. Despite herself, Caroline felt a flicker of recognition. The world is full of predators, she said quietly. At least the animal ones are straightforward. Exactly. He watched her add salt to his pile of supplies. Though I have learned that not all people are predators, some are just trying to survive like everyone else. And how do you tell the difference? Caroline asked, an edge creeping into her voice. Before it is too late. Zachary was quiet for a long moment. I guess you watch them, see how they treat those weaker than themselves, whether their actions match their words, whether they respect boundaries. His blue eyes met hers steadily. And you trust your instincts even when it is hard. She wanted to tell him that her instincts had failed her, that she had not sensed danger before the raiders came, that all the trust in the world meant nothing when violence arrived on swift horses. Instead, she just nodded and finished calculating his bill. This time, when he loaded his horse, she walked out without being asked. The gelding whickered softly when she approached, and without thinking she reached up to stroke its soft nose. The horse leaned into her touch, and something tight in her chest loosened slightly. His name is Goliath, Zachary said. I raised him from a colt. He is a good judge of character. Animals are easier than people, Caroline murmured, still stroking the horse's nose. Most times, yes. Zachary secured the last of his supplies. Miss Owens, would it be acceptable if I stopped by when I come to town? Just to visit, I mean. You do not have to say yes, but I would enjoy the conversation if you are willing. Caroline dropped her hand from the horse and stepped back, her walls slamming back into place. Why would you want to do that? Because you are interesting. Because you have survived something terrible and kept going. Because I think we understand each other at least a little. He swung into the saddle. Think about it, I will be back in the spring. She watched him ride away again. And this time something uncomfortably like loneliness settled over her shoulders. Winter in Las Vegas was mild compared to places further north, but the desert cold had a penetrating quality that seemed to seep into bones. Caroline spent more time in the store, grateful for the cast iron stove that Mr. Henderson kept burning. The town quieted as travelers became less frequent, and she found herself with too much time to think. She thought about Zachary Ingram riding through mountain snow, alone in his cabin or tent, or wherever mountain men lived. She thought about his offer of friendship, if that was what it had been. She thought about the fact that he had asked permission, had given her control over whether she wanted to see him again. No one had done that since her parents died. The Hendersons had been kind, but they had assumed she needed their charity, had given her a job and a room without asking what she actually wanted. The other townspeople either pitied her or ignored her, and she preferred the latter. But Zachary had asked. He had acknowledged that she had a choice. When spring finally arrived with its explosion of desert wildflowers, Caroline found herself watching the door more often, wondering if he would actually return. She told herself she was being foolish, that a mountain man's promise meant nothing, that he had probably forgotten all about the broken girl in the general store. Then, on a bright April morning, the door opened and there he was. He looked different this time, his hair slightly shorter, his buckskin shirt replaced with a blue cotton one that made his eyes look even brighter. He carried a bundle wrapped in cloth, which he set carefully on the counter. "Good morning, Miss Owens," he said. "I brought you something." Caroline stared at the bundle suspiciously. "Why?" "Because I thought you might like it. You can refuse if you want, I will not be offended." He pushed it toward her slightly, then stepped back, giving her space to decide. She unwrapped the cloth slowly, half expecting a trick, some cruel joke. Inside lay a pair of beaded moccasins, the leather soft and supple, the beadwork intricate and beautiful. The pattern showed a desert sunset, all oranges and reds and purples, with a single star at the center of each toe. "I traded for them with a Shoshone woman up north," Zachary explained. "I thought the colors would remind you of home, such as it is." Caroline's hands trembled as she lifted one moccasin. The leather was buttery soft, clearly the work of a skilled craftsperson. No one had given her a gift in 3 years. "I cannot accept this," she whispered. "Why not?" "Because I have nothing to give you in return." Zachary shook his head. "It is a gift, not a trade. You do not owe me anything. But if it makes you uncomfortable, I will take them back. No hard feelings." She looked down at the moccasins, at the care that had gone into their creation. At the thought Zachary had put into choosing something that would suit her specifically. Her mother had taught her that gifts were expressions of care, that refusing them was sometimes ruder than accepting. And some small, starved part of her wanted to keep them, wanted this tangible proof that someone had thought of her. "Thank you," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "They are beautiful." The smile that lit Zachary's face transformed him, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. "I am glad you like them. Now I need supplies. Different list this time. I am planning to set up a more permanent camp, so I need building materials." They fell into conversation as she helped him, and Caroline found herself actually answering his questions instead of deflecting them. She told him about a book Mrs. Henderson had lent her, about the garden she was attempting to grow in the back of the store, despite the desert's hostility to anything green. He told her about a family of foxes he had watched all winter, about finding a hot spring hidden in a canyon, about the way the mountains looked when snow covered their peaks. When his supplies were loaded, he did not immediately ride away. Instead, he stood by Goliath, his hat in his hands, looking uncharacteristically uncertain. "Miss Owens, I know you have no reason to trust me or anyone else, but I want you to know that I meant what I said. I would like to visit when I am in town if you are willing. No expectations, no pressure. Just conversation between two people who understand what it is like to want distance from the world." Caroline clutched the moccasins to her chest, feeling the softness of the leather against her palms. Trust was a luxury she could not afford, a weakness that led to devastation. But standing in the spring sunshine with this mountain man who asked instead of taking, who gave without demanding, she felt the smallest crack form in the walls she had built around her heart. "You may visit," she said carefully, "when you are in town, but I make no promises beyond conversation." "That is all I am asking for," Zachary replied. He settled his hat back on his head and swung into the saddle. "I will see you in the summer, Caroline." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formality of Miss, and the sound of it in his deep voice sent warmth through her that had nothing to do with the desert sun. She wore the moccasins that night in her room, walking back and forth across the rough wooden floor, feeling how they molded to her feet perfectly. She thought about Zachary riding back to his mountains, about the care he had taken in choosing this gift, about the way he looked at her like she was a person worth knowing rather than a tragedy to be pitied. For the first time since her parents died, Caroline let herself wonder if maybe, just maybe, the world might contain something other than pain. Summer brought oppressive heat that made the store feel like an oven despite open windows, and the shade from the canvas awnings Mr. Henderson had installed. Caroline moved through her days in a haze of sweat and dust, selling supplies to miners and ranchers and the occasional desperado who looked at her with eyes that made her skin crawl. She kept her knife close and her words clipped, maintaining the walls that kept her safe. But when Zachary arrived in July, those walls seemed to thin. He had developed a pattern of visiting the store first for supplies, then returning later to sit on the bench outside and talk with her during the slow afternoon hours. Mrs. Henderson encouraged this, shooing Caroline out the door with a knowing smile that Caroline pretended not to see. "Tell me about your parents," Zachary said one afternoon, the request so direct that Caroline nearly fled back inside. But something in his expression stopped her, an openness that suggested he would understand if she refused. "Why do you want to know?" she asked, defensive. "Because they made you who you are. Because grief shared is sometimes lighter than grief carried alone. Because I told you about my brother who died in the war, and turnabout is fair play." He stretched his long legs out in front of him, his muscular frame relaxed but alert. "But if you would rather not, we can talk about something else." Caroline was silent for so long that a family of chickens had time to scratch their way across the dusty street and back again. Finally, she spoke. "My father was a farmer. He believed you could make anything grow if you worked hard enough and had faith. My mother was a teacher before she married him. She taught me to read from the Bible and dime novels in equal measure." A faint smile touched her lips at the memory. "Father pretended to disapprove, but I caught him reading the novels after she fell asleep." "They sound like good people," Zachary said quietly. "They were. They took in a family of travelers one night during a storm, shared our food, our shelter. They believed in helping others." Her voice hardened. "3 days later the raiders came. Perhaps the travelers told them about us. Perhaps it was just bad luck. Either way, my parents died because they were kind." Zachary did not offer empty platitudes about how kindness was its own reward or how her parents would not want her to be bitter. Instead, he just said, "That is a hell of a thing to survive." "Yes," Caroline agreed. "It is." They sat in silence after that, but it was not uncomfortable. The sun beat down on the street, turning the air to liquid heat, and somewhere a dog barked half-heartedly. Caroline felt something loosening inside her, some knot that had been pulled tight for 3 years. "I was supposed to die with them," she heard herself say. "I was in the house when the raiders came. My mother shoved me into the root cellar and dropped the rug over the door. I heard everything. The shooting, the screaming, the fire they set before they left." She stared at her hands, seeing blood that was no longer there. "I stayed in that cellar for 2 days before I dared to come out. By then, the sheriff had found the bodies. They had to pry my hands off the knife I had taken down there with me." Zachary's jaw tightened, muscles working beneath his tanned skin. "You did what you needed to survive. There is no shame in that." "Is there not?" Caroline turned to look at him directly. "I hid while my parents were murdered. I did nothing to help them." "You were 15 years old and unarmed against multiple raiders," Zachary said, his voice firm. "If you had come out of that cellar, you would have died too and probably suffered worse before the end. Your mother knew that. That is why she hid you. She saved your life with her last act. Do not dishonor that sacrifice by wishing you had thrown it away." The words hit Caroline like a physical blow. She had spent 3 years drowning in guilt, believing she was a coward, hating herself for surviving. But Zachary spoke with such certainty, such conviction, that it cut through the fog of self-loathing. "How do you live with it?" she whispered. "The memories, the guilt." "Some days better than others," he admitted. "I spent a year drinking myself into oblivion after I left the cavalry, trying to drown the faces of the people I killed on orders, the friends I watched die. Then I realized I was dying too, just slower. So I went to the mountains and I learned to live with the silence. I learned that survival is not the same as healing, but it is a start." "Have you healed?" Caroline asked. Zachary considered the question seriously. Mostly. I have scars and they still hurt when the weather changes, so to speak. But I have also learned that carrying the weight gets easier when you stop trying to carry it alone. I do not have anyone to help carry it, Caroline said, the admission painful. You have me, Zachary replied simply. If you want. No obligations, no expectations. Just someone who understands what it is like to have nightmares about the past. Caroline felt tears burning in her eyes for the first time in years. She blinked them back fiercely, but one escaped, rolling down her cheek. Zachary did not comment on it, did not reach out to wipe it away or pull her into an unwanted embrace. He just sat there, solid and steady, letting her decide what she needed. I do not know how to trust people anymore, she said, her voice breaking. Then do not trust me yet, Zachary said. Just let me sit here. Let me visit when I come to town. Let me show you day by day that I mean what I say. Trust is not something you decide all at once. It is something you build brick by brick until you look back and realize you have constructed something solid. She nodded, not trusting her voice. They sat together as the sun crawled across the sky, and Caroline felt something fragile and new unfurling in her chest. It felt dangerously like hope. The pattern continued through the rest of summer and into fall. Zachary came to town every few weeks, sometimes for supplies, sometimes just to visit. He never pushed, never demanded more than Caroline was willing to give. He told her stories about his life in the mountains, about tracking a cougar for 3 days, about finding ancient petroglyphs in a hidden canyon. She found herself sharing more in return, talking about her childhood on the farm, the books she read, the dreams she had once had before reality shattered them. In late September, Zachary arrived with news that changed everything. There is a cabin for sale about 10 miles north of town, he said as they sat on their usual bench. Small place, belonged to a prospector who gave up and moved to California. It has good water, decent land, close enough to town for supplies but far enough for privacy. I am thinking of buying it. Caroline felt her heart skip a beat. You are moving closer to Las Vegas. If I buy it, yes. I have been thinking about settling down, at least partially. I could still trap in the winter, but spend the rest of the year ranching or farming. Build something permanent instead of just wandering. He glanced at her, his blue eyes searching her face. I would still be in the mountains when I wanted solitude, but I would be around more regular-like. Why? The question came out sharper than she intended. Why change your whole life? Zachary was quiet for a moment, clearly choosing his words carefully. Because I have realized that running from the past and building a future are different things. I have been running for 5 years. Maybe it is time to try building instead. And this has nothing to do with me, Caroline said, her voice flat with skepticism. I would be lying if I said you were not part of the reason, Zachary admitted. But you are not the only reason, and I am not asking you for anything, Caroline. I am just telling you my plans. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. She wanted to be angry with him, to accuse him of trying to trap her or manipulate her. But his expression remained open and honest, and she could find no deception in his words. He was simply being truthful, giving her information and letting her make her own choices. When will you decide? She asked finally. I need to see the property first. I am riding out tomorrow to look at it. Would you want to come with me? I value your opinion, and you have lived in this area longer than I have. You would know better than me whether the land is worth buying. Caroline's first instinct was to refuse. Riding out alone with a man, even one she had come to trust more than she wanted to admit, felt dangerous. But another part of her, the part that remembered who she had been before fear consumed her, wanted to say yes, Wanted to see beyond the dusty streets of Las Vegas, to ride into the desert on a bright fall morning. I would need to ask the Hendersons for the day off, she said slowly. Zachary's face lit up. Of course. If they agree, I will meet you at dawn tomorrow by the livery stable. I will rent a gentle horse for you, Mrs. Henderson was delighted when Caroline asked for the day off, practically pushing her out the door with a packed lunch and a knowing smile that made Caroline's cheeks burn. She spent the evening alternating between excitement and terror, changing her mind about going at least a dozen times before finally falling into fitful sleep. Dawn found her at the livery stable, dressed in her most practical clothes with the beaded moccasins on her feet. Zachary was already there, looking impossibly large atop Goliath, with a sweet-tempered mare waiting beside him. The mare was a pretty chestnut with a white blaze and kind eyes, already saddled and ready. Her name is Honey, Zachary said, dismounting to help Caroline up. She belongs to the livery owner's daughter, but she is gentle as a lamb. Is that all right? Caroline approached the mare cautiously, letting Honey sniff her hand before stroking her neck. She is beautiful. Zachary helped her into the saddle, his strong hand steadying her, and Caroline was acutely aware of his closeness, the warmth of his palms through her skirt. Once she was settled, he mounted Goliath and they rode out of town as the sun painted the desert in shades of gold and pink. The ride north took them through landscape that gradually changed from flat desert to rolling hills dotted with juniper and sage. Zachary kept Goliath at an easy pace, checking frequently to make sure Caroline was comfortable. She had not ridden in years, but the skill came back gradually, and soon she was relaxing into the rhythm of Honey's gait. They talked as they rode, conversation flowing more easily out here under the open sky. Zachary pointed out animal tracks and plants, sharing his knowledge of the land. Caroline found herself laughing at his story about a raccoon that had stolen an entire bag of flour from his camp, leaving tiny white paw prints everywhere. The cabin appeared after 2 hours of riding, tucked into a small valley with a creek running beside it. It was indeed small, just 2 rooms from what Caroline could see, but solidly built from logs with a stone chimney. The land around it showed signs of previous cultivation, and a small barn stood slightly apart from the main structure. They dismounted and explored together, Zachary pointing out the good features and the problems he would need to fix. The roof needed some repairs, and one window had a cracked pane, but overall the cabin was sound. Inside, the main room held a fireplace, a rough table, and some shelves. The second room was barely large enough for a bed and a trunk. "What do you think?" Zachary asked as they stood in the main room. Caroline ran her hand along the windowsill, feeling the smooth wood beneath her fingers. "It has good bones. The location is protected from the worst winds, and that creek probably runs year-round. The land could support cattle or horses, maybe some crops if you were willing to fight the desert for them. So you think I should buy it?" She turned to look at him, this mountain man who had somehow become the first person she trusted in 3 years. He stood in a shaft of sunlight from the window, his muscular frame relaxed, his long hair slightly disheveled from the ride. He looked like he belonged here, like this place had been waiting for him. "I think you should do whatever makes you happy," Caroline said carefully. "But yes, I think this is a good property." Zachary smiled, and Caroline felt warmth bloom in her chest. "Then I will make an offer to the bank when we get back to town." They ate the lunch Mrs. Henderson had packed while sitting on a flat rock by the creek, watching the water tumble over smooth stones. The food was simple but good, and Caroline realized she felt more content in this moment than she had in years. The sun was warm but not oppressive, the sound of water was soothing, and Zachary's presence beside her felt steady and safe. "Can I ask you something personal?" Zachary said, breaking the comfortable silence. Caroline tensed slightly but nodded. "You can ask. I may not answer." "Have you thought about what you want for your future? Beyond working in the store, I mean. Do you have dreams, plans?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her about her future in so long that she had almost forgotten she was allowed to have one. "I used to dream of being a teacher like my mother," she said slowly. "I thought I would marry someday, have children, live somewhere with trees and green grass instead of endless sand." She looked down at her hands. "But those were a child's dreams. I do not know if I am capable of any of that anymore." "Why not?" Zachary asked gently. "Because I am broken," Caroline said bluntly. "I jump at shadows. I cannot sleep without nightmares. The thought of trusting someone enough to marry them, to have children with them, terrifies me. What if I fail to protect them the way I failed to protect my parents?" "You did not fail your parents," Zachary said firmly. "And being damaged is not the same as being broken beyond repair. You are still here, Caroline. You survived. You work hard, you read books, you tend a garden in the desert. Those are not the actions of someone who is broken. Those are the actions of someone who is fighting to live instead of just exist." Tears burned in Caroline's eyes again. "Sometimes I am so tired of fighting." "I know," Zachary said softly, "but you do not have to fight alone anymore, not if you do not want to." He reached out slowly, telegraphing his movement, and placed his large, calloused hand over her smaller one where it rested on the rock between them. Caroline's first instinct was to pull away, but she forced herself to stay still, to accept this small gesture of comfort. His hand was warm and solid, and it did not demand anything from her. It simply offered support if she wanted it. She turned her hand over, letting their palms touch, and felt Zachary's fingers gently close around hers. They sat like that for a long time, holding hands by the creek, while something deep inside Caroline began to heal. The ride back to Las Vegas was quieter, but the silence felt companionable rather than awkward. When they reached the livery stable as the sun was setting, Zachary helped Caroline dismount, his hands lingering at her waist for just a moment longer than necessary. "Thank you for coming with me today," he said, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "It meant more than I can say to share that with you." "Thank you for asking me," Caroline replied. "I had forgotten what it felt like to look forward to something." Zachary smiled, and Caroline noticed how it softened the hard edges of his face, making him look younger and less burdened. "I hope you will look forward to seeing me again. I will be back in a week or so, after I talk to the bank about the cabin." "I will be here," Caroline said, and meant it. She walked back to the store feeling lighter than she had in years, and that night, for the first time since her parents died, she dreamed of something other than blood and fire. She dreamed of a cabin by a creek, of sunlight on water, of a strong hand holding hers. Zachary bought the cabin and spent the next month making it livable. He still came to town regularly for supplies and to visit Caroline, but now he had somewhere to return to besides the vast expanse of mountains. Caroline found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe, counting the days until his next visit. Mrs. Henderson noticed, of course. "That mountain man has his eye on you," she said one afternoon while they were stocking shelves. "Zachary is just a friend," Caroline protested, but her cheeks flushed with color. "Hum," Mrs. Henderson said skeptically. "And I am the Queen of England. That man looks at you like you hung the moon, dear, and unless I am very much mistaken, you have similar feelings." Caroline wanted to deny it, but the words stuck in her throat. The truth was that her feelings for Zachary had grown into something she could no longer ignore. She thought about him constantly, felt her heart race when he walked through the door, treasured every conversation and shared moment. But admitting that meant admitting vulnerability, opening herself up to the possibility of loss, and she was not sure she could survive being devastated again. "I am afraid," she admitted quietly. Mrs. Henderson's expression softened. "Of course you are, dear. Anyone with sense would be afraid after what you have been through. But being afraid and being paralyzed by fear are two different things. That man is patient and kind, and he clearly cares for you deeply. The question is, are you going to let fear steal your chance at happiness?" The words haunted Caroline over the following weeks. She watched Zachary carefully during his visits, looking for signs of deception or hidden cruelty, but found only consistency and gentleness. He never pushed her, never demanded more than she was willing to give, but his feelings were becoming increasingly obvious in the way he looked at her, the way he found excuses to be near her, the small gifts he brought on each visit. In November, as the weather turned cold and the first snow dusted the distant mountains, Zachary arrived at the store with an unusual request. "I am having a problem at the cabin that I think you might be able to help with," he said, looking almost shy. "Would you be willing to come out again? I promise to have you back before dark." Curious and a bit wary, Caroline agreed. The Hendersons gave their blessing readily, and soon she was riding Honey through the crisp autumn air beside Zachary. When they reached the cabin, Caroline noticed immediate improvements. The roof had been repaired, new glass gleamed in all the windows, and smoke curled cheerfully from the chimney. "What is the problem?" she asked as Zachary helped her dismount. "Inside," he said mysteriously, leading her toward the cabin. He opened the door and gestured for her to enter first. Caroline stepped inside and stopped in her tracks. The interior had been completely transformed. The rough furniture had been replaced with a proper table and chairs, clearly handmade but well crafted. Colorful rugs covered the plank floor and curtains hung in the windows. A rocking chair sat before the fireplace, and shelves lined one wall, waiting to be filled. "Zachary, what is this?" she breathed. He moved to stand beside her, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel his warmth. "I told you I was building something permanent. I have been working on making this place into a real home instead of just a shelter. But I realized I have a problem." "What problem?" Caroline asked, her heart pounding. Zachary turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his blue eyes made her breath catch. "It does not feel like home without you here. I built this thinking about you every day, wondering if you would like the rocking chair, if the shelves were tall enough for all your books, if the kitchen was arranged in a way that would make sense to you." He took a deep breath. "Caroline, these past months have been the best of my life. Getting to know you, earning your trust piece by piece, watching you slowly open up like a flower in spring. I am in love with you. I think I have been since the first time I saw you in the store, looking at me like I might be a threat but standing your ground anyway." Caroline's eyes filled with tears. "Zachary, let me finish," he said gently. "I know you have been hurt. I know trust is hard for you, and I understand why. I am not asking you to marry me tomorrow or make any promises you are not ready for. But I am asking if you will let me court you properly. Let me show you that love does not have to end in pain, that some people stay, that you are worth every bit of patience and care I can give you." A tear spilled down Caroline's cheek, then another. "I am so scared," she whispered. "I know," Zachary said, reaching up slowly to wipe her tears away with his calloused thumbs. His touch was infinitely gentle, and Caroline found herself leaning into it. "But you are also brave. You survived hell and came out fighting. Letting yourself love again might be the bravest thing you have ever done. What if I lose you?" The question came out broken, revealing the depth of her fear. "What if you do not?" Zachary countered. "What if we have 50 happy years together? What if we build something beautiful? What if your parents' legacy is not just death and fear, but the daughter they raised who was strong enough to find joy again?" Caroline looked up at this mountain man who had been so patient with her, who had never pushed or demanded, who had shown her through actions and not just words that he could be trusted. She thought about the months they had spent together, the way he had become the best part of her days, the way her heart felt full when he was near. "I care for you too," she said, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff. "I think I might love you, although I am not entirely sure I remember what love feels like anymore." Zachary's smile was brilliant and tender. "Then we will figure it out together. No pressure, no expectations. Just two people who understand each other, taking things one day at a time." "One day at a time," Caroline echoed. Then, gathering all her courage, she stepped forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, pressing her face against his broad chest. She felt him freeze for a moment in surprise before his strong arms came around her, holding her carefully as though she were something precious and fragile. They stood like that for a long time, the fire crackling in the hearth, the cabin warm and welcoming around them. Caroline felt safe in Zachary's embrace in a way she had not felt safe since before her parents died. His heart beat steady and strong beneath her ear, and his warmth seeped into her bones, chasing away the cold that had lived there for 3 years. "Can we stay here for a while?" she asked, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Just sit by the fire and talk. We can stay as long as you want," Zachary promised, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of her head. "I have all the time in the world for you, Caroline." They sat in the rocking chair together, Caroline tucked against Zachary's side with his arm around her shoulders. They talked about everything and nothing, making plans for his ranch, discussing books they had read, sharing memories both painful and sweet. As the afternoon light faded, Zachary lit lamps and they continued talking, neither wanting the day to end. When he finally took her back to town, riding through darkness with a lantern to light their way, Caroline felt fundamentally changed. She had taken a step toward trusting again, toward believing in the possibility of happiness, and the sky had not fallen. Zachary had held her heart gently, and she began to believe he might continue to do so. Winter brought its own challenges and joys. Zachary spent more time in town, as snow made the mountain passes treacherous, and his courtship of Caroline became the subject of much speculation among the townspeople. He was unfailingly respectful, always asking permission before touching her, giving her space when she needed it, and gradually earning deeper levels of trust. He brought her small gifts, thoughtful things that showed he paid attention to her interests. A book she had mentioned wanting to read. Seeds for her garden come spring. A warm shawl in her favorite shade of green. Each gift was presented with the same words, "No obligation, just because I saw it and thought of you." They went on rides when the weather permitted, exploring the desert and foothills together. Zachary taught Caroline to track animals, to read the signs of weather changes, to find water in seemingly barren landscape. She felt herself becoming stronger, more confident, rediscovering the girl she had been before tragedy struck. On Christmas Eve, the Hendersons invited Zachary to join them for dinner, and Caroline found herself nervous about this blending of the different parts of her life. But Zachary charmed the older couple with his quiet manners and genuine gratitude, and Mr. Henderson took Caroline aside at one point to tell her, "That is a good man, Caroline. He will take care of you if you let him." After dinner, Zachary asked if he could speak with Caroline privately. They stood on the porch of the store, their breath forming clouds in the cold air, and Zachary pulled a small wrapped package from his coat. "I know we are taking things slow," he said, "and I respect that. But I wanted to give you something for Christmas. Will you open it?" Caroline unwrapped the package to find a beautiful leather journal, the cover tooled with an intricate design of desert flowers. Inside, the pages were blank, waiting to be filled. "I thought you might want to write," Zachary explained. "Your mother was a teacher and you have her way with words. Maybe writing down your thoughts and memories would help. Or you could write stories, whatever you want. It is yours to fill however you choose." Caroline ran her fingers over the smooth leather, deeply touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "Thank you, Zachary. This is perfect." She hesitated, then reached into her own pocket and pulled out a small bundle. "I made something for you, too." Zachary unwrapped it to find a pair of warm woolen socks, hand-knitted in a dark blue that matched his eyes. His expression softened as he examined them, noting the careful, even stitches. "You made these yourself?" he asked. Caroline nodded, suddenly shy. "Mrs. Henderson taught me to knit. I thought you might need warm socks for the mountains." "They are wonderful," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "Thank you, Caroline. I will treasure them." He stepped closer, and Caroline tilted her face up, suddenly hoping he might kiss her. Zachary seemed to read her thoughts, because he leaned down slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away. When she did not, his lips brushed softly against hers in a kiss so gentle it made her heart ache. When they parted, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I love you," he murmured. "More than I thought I could love anyone." "I love you too," Caroline whispered back, and this time she was certain of the feeling, certain that this was real and right and worth the risk. The new year of 1878 brought changes. Zachary's ranch began to take shape as he purchased cattle and started building a larger barn. He asked Caroline to help him name the place, and after much discussion, they settled on Creek Valley Ranch. It was simple and descriptive, much like Zachary himself. Caroline found herself spending more time at the ranch, riding out on her days off to help with small tasks and simply to be near Zachary. She learned to appreciate the rhythms of ranch life, the satisfaction of hard work, the beauty of the harsh landscape. Zachary was teaching her to ride better, to rope cattle, to manage the practical aspects of life outside town. In March, on a warm spring day with wildflowers beginning to bloom across the desert, Zachary asked Caroline to take a walk with him along the creek. They had developed a comfortable physical relationship, holding hands, exchanging kisses, sitting close together. But today, Zachary seemed nervous in a way she had never seen before. "Is something wrong?" Caroline asked as they walked. "No, nothing is wrong. Everything is very right, actually, which is why I am terrified." Zachary stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his large ones. "Caroline, we have been courting for 6 months now. I know you and you know me. We have shared our pasts, our fears, our dreams. You have let me into your heart, piece by piece, and I hope I have proven myself worthy of that trust." Caroline's heart began to race. "Zachary, what are you saying?" He sank to one knee on the soft grass beside the creek, still holding her hands. "I am saying that I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you made the right choice in trusting me. I want to wake up beside you every morning and fall asleep with you in my arms every night. I want to build this ranch with you, raise children with you if you want them, grow old with you. Caroline Owens, will you marry me?" Tears streamed down Caroline's face, but for the first time in years, they were tears of joy rather than pain. "Yes," she said, her voice breaking. "Yes, I will marry you." Zachary surged to his feet and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, and Caroline kissed him back with all the love and trust she had rebuilt over their months together. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger and Caroline stared at it through her tears. "When did you get this?" "I have been carrying it for 2 months," Zachary admitted, "waiting for the right moment, terrified you might say no." "How could I say no to you?" Caroline asked, cupping his face in her hands. "You gave me back my life, Zachary. You showed me that trust and love were still possible. You were patient when I was difficult, gentle when I was scared, steady when I was falling apart. I love you more than I have words to express." "Then spend the rest of your life showing me," Zachary said, kissing her again. They were married in late April in a small ceremony at the church in Las Vegas. Caroline wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had helped her make, and she carried wildflowers that Zachary had picked that morning. He wore a new shirt and had actually trimmed his hair, though it still brushed his collar. Mr. Henderson gave Caroline away, and Mrs. Henderson cried throughout the entire ceremony. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife and told Zachary he could kiss his bride, Zachary pulled Caroline close with such tenderness that several people in the small congregation sighed audibly. Caroline felt joy bubble up inside her like a spring, pure and sweet and overwhelming. The reception was held at the general store, with the whole town invited. People brought food and gifts, and there was music and dancing late into the evening. Caroline danced with her husband, marveling at how naturally that word came to her now, and felt safe in his strong arms. As the party wound down, Zachary helped Caroline onto Goliath while he led Honey, and they rode together through the moonlit desert toward their home at Creek Valley Ranch. The cabin was waiting for them, warm and welcoming with lamps already lit from when Zachary had prepared it earlier. He carried her over the threshold, a tradition that made Caroline laugh and blush at the same time. Inside, the cabin glowed with lamplight, and someone, probably Mrs. Henderson, had left wildflowers in vases throughout the rooms. "Welcome home, Mrs. Ingram," Zachary said, setting Caroline gently on her feet but keeping his arms around her. "It feels strange to be called that," Caroline admitted, "but good strange, like putting on new clothes that fit perfectly." Zachary led her to the bedroom, which he had furnished with a beautiful handmade bed covered in quilts. He was gentle and patient with her, understanding that this was new and potentially frightening given her past trauma. But Caroline found that with Zachary, there was no fear, only love and trust and a growing passion that surprised her with its intensity. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped for and more, and when she fell asleep in Zachary's arms, she felt truly at peace for the first time in years. The nightmares that had plagued her for so long did not come. Instead, she dreamed of the future, of the life they would build together. The first year of their marriage was one of hard work and deep happiness. Caroline threw herself into making the ranch a success, working alongside Zachary from dawn to dusk. She learned to manage the household, to preserve food for winter, to tend the animals. She also started a small vegetable garden that actually thrived with the creek water for irrigation, proving her father had been right about things growing if you worked hard enough. Zachary proved to be everything she had hoped for in a husband. He was patient and kind, strong when she needed protecting but always respectful of her ability to protect herself. He made her laugh with his dry humor and held her when nightmares occasionally returned. They talked about everything, continuing to build the foundation of trust and communication that their relationship was built on. In the fall, Caroline realized she was pregnant. She was terrified at first, remembering her fear about being able to protect a child, but Zachary's joy and confidence slowly eased her worries. He was attentive throughout her pregnancy, insisting she rest more than she wanted to, bringing her treats from town, talking to her swelling belly about the ranch and the mountains and how loved this baby already was. Their son was born in May of 1879, a healthy baby boy with his father's blue eyes and a surprisingly full head of dark hair. They named him Thomas, after Zachary's brother who had died in the war. Holding her son for the first time, Caroline felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. This tiny person was a miracle, a symbol of hope and new beginnings. Zachary was a wonderful father, gentle and patient despite his large size and rough exterior. He made a cradle with his own hands and spent hours rocking Thomas, singing old songs in his rumbling voice. Caroline often found them like that, her mountain man and their tiny son, and felt her love for Zachary deepen even further. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, the ranch prospered. Zachary's cattle herd expanded, and he gained a reputation for raising quality stock. Caroline started teaching children from neighboring ranches, fulfilling her mother's dream in a small way. Their home was filled with laughter and love, a stark contrast to the loneliness and fear that had defined Caroline's life just a few years before. When Thomas was 2, Caroline became pregnant again. This time, she was excited rather than afraid, confident in her ability to be a mother and in Zachary's partnership. Their daughter was born in the spring of 1881, a beautiful baby girl with Caroline's green eyes and her father's strong features. They named her Sarah, after Caroline's mother. Life at Creek Valley Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. The children grew healthy and happy, surrounded by love and the wild beauty of the Nevada landscape. Caroline taught them to read and write, to appreciate books and learning. Zachary taught them to ride and rope, to respect the land and animals, to be strong but gentle. One evening, when Thomas was 6 and Sarah was 4, Caroline stood on the porch watching Zachary teach the children to spot animal tracks in the dirt. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and her heart felt so full she thought it might burst. Zachary caught her watching and smiled, that same smile that had slowly won her heart years ago. He walked over, leaving the children to their examination of rabbit prints, and pulled her into his arms. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I am thinking about how different my life is from what I thought it would be," Caroline said, leaning into his embrace. 5 years ago, I was certain I would never trust anyone again, never love, never have a family. I was just existing, waiting for time to pass. And now, Zachary prompted, his arms tightening around her. "Now I have everything I never dared to hope for," Caroline said, turning in his arms to look up at him. "I have a husband who loves me, children who make every day an adventure, a home that feels safe and warm. You gave me all of this, Zachary. You earned my trust one gentle day at a time, and you have never once made me regret giving it to you. You gave me just as much," Zachary said seriously. "You gave me a reason to stop running from my past and start building a future. You made me believe that I could be more than just a man hiding in the mountains. You made me a husband, a father, a better version of myself." They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, their children playing nearby, the ranch peaceful around them. It was a perfect moment, the kind that Caroline now treasured instead of feared losing. The years continued to pass in a blur of seasons and growth. Thomas grew tall and strong like his father, showing early promise as a rancher. Sarah proved to have her mother's love of learning and her father's fearlessness, a combination that kept her parents constantly on their toes. In 1883, Caroline gave birth to twins, much to everyone's surprise. Jacob and Emma arrived healthy and loud, adding even more life and chaos to the Ingram household. Zachary expanded the cabin to accommodate their growing family, adding 2 more bedrooms and a larger kitchen where Caroline could teach her children and host the occasional neighbor. Creek Valley Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of hospitality and honest dealing. Travelers knew they could stop for a meal and rest, and Zachary never turned away anyone in genuine need. Caroline sometimes worried about this, her old fears surfacing, but Zachary was careful to protect his family while still maintaining his principles of kindness. One night, when the twins were about 2 years old, Caroline woke from a nightmare about the raid that had killed her parents. It was the first such nightmare she had had in months, and she woke gasping, heart pounding. Immediately, Zachary was there, pulling her into his arms. "I have you," he murmured, stroking her hair. "You are safe. Everyone is safe." Caroline clung to him, letting his solid presence ground her. "I thought I was past this," she whispered. "Healing is not linear," Zachary said gently. "You will have bad days sometimes, and that is all right. I will be here for all of them." "I am so grateful for you," Caroline said, her breathing slowly returning to normal. "For this life we have built. Sometimes I cannot believe it is real." "It is real," Zachary assured her, "and it is ours. No one can take it from us." They lay awake talking until dawn, and Caroline felt the nightmare's grip loosening. In the morning, she woke to find Thomas making breakfast for his younger siblings, Sarah helping him with quiet efficiency. Her family, her home, the life she had built from the ashes of tragedy, it was all real and solid and hers. As the children grew older, Caroline and Zachary made sure they understood their mother's history. They told them about the raid, about loss and survival, about the importance of both strength and compassion. Thomas, who had inherited his father's protective nature, became fiercely devoted to keeping his mother and siblings safe. Sarah developed a deep empathy for others who had suffered, often bringing home stray animals or befriending lonely children. In 1890, when Thomas was 11, a family of travelers stopped at the ranch asking for help. Their wagon had broken down, and they had a sick child. Caroline's first instinct was fear and suspicion, old memories rising up. But she looked at Zachary, saw the calm assessment in his eyes, and made a choice to trust his judgment. They took the family in, Zachary helping to repair the wagon while Caroline nursed the sick little girl back to health. The family stayed for a week, and when they left, the father pressed a small amount of money into Zachary's hand, tears in his eyes. "You saved our daughter's life," he said. "We can never repay that debt." After they left, Caroline stood with Zachary watching the wagon disappear into the distance. "I was terrified when they arrived," she admitted. "I thought about the travelers my parents helped, how that might have led to the raid." "I know," Zachary said, pulling her close. "But you chose to help anyway. That is courage, Caroline. Not the absence of fear, but doing the right thing despite it." "My parents would be proud," Caroline said softly, tears in her eyes. "They believed in helping others, and for so long I thought that belief had killed them, but maybe their legacy should not be fear. Maybe it should be the kindness they showed, the lives they touched." "I think that is exactly what their legacy should be," Zachary agreed. "And you are living that legacy through our children, through this ranch, through the life we have built." The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a young man, strong and capable, helping his father run the expanding ranch. Sarah became a teacher, just as her grandmother had been, starting a small school at the ranch for neighboring children. The twins grew wild and free, exploring every inch of the ranch and the surrounding desert. In 1895, Thomas fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a spirited girl named Anna who could rope and ride as well as any man. Watching her son court his sweetheart, Caroline was struck by how much he resembled his father, patient, respectful, earning trust through consistent action rather than empty words. Thomas and Anna were married in the fall, and Zachary helped them build a house on the far edge of Creek Valley ranch land. Watching her son start his own family, Caroline felt the circle of life completing itself in a beautiful way. She had gone from orphan to wife to mother, and now she would be a grandmother. "Does it make you feel old?" Zachary teased one night as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the desert gold. "It makes me feel blessed," Caroline replied, leaning against his shoulder. Their hair was graying now, and lines marked their faces, but Zachary was still as strong as ever, and Caroline felt more beautiful in his eyes than she ever had. "I never imagined this," Zachary said, gesturing to the ranch, the house Thomas and Anna had built, the whole life they had created. "When I was alone in the mountains, running from my past, I thought I would die alone. I never dreamed I could have all this." "We built it together," Caroline reminded him. "Every piece of it one day at a time, just like you said we would." Thomas and Anna's first child, a boy they named Zachary after his grandfather, was born in the spring of 1896. Holding her grandson for the first time, Caroline felt a profound sense of peace. This child would grow up knowing love and safety, surrounded by family, building on the legacy that she and Zachary had created from nothing. Sarah married a year later, choosing a man who reminded Caroline very much of Zachary: quiet, strong, patient. The twins were still young, but they showed every sign of growing into fine adults, carrying forward the values their parents had instilled. In 1900, as the new century dawned, Caroline and Zachary celebrated their 22nd wedding anniversary. Their children threw them a party, and half the territory seemed to show up. Creek Valley Ranch had become more than just a home. It was a symbol of what could be built through hard work, love, and trust. That night, after everyone had left and the ranch was quiet, Caroline and Zachary walked down to the creek where Zachary had proposed so many years ago. The water still tumbled over the same stones, and wildflowers still bloomed along the banks. "You remember the first time I saw you?" Zachary asked, pulling Caroline close. "Standing in that store looking like you might pull a knife on me," Caroline laughed. "I was terrified of you. You were so large and intense, and I was certain you meant me harm." "And look at us now," Zachary said, wonder in his voice. 22 years, 4 children, 3 grandchildren and counting, a successful ranch. Sometimes I still cannot believe you said yes to me." "I said yes because you never gave me a reason to say no," Caroline replied, turning in his arms to face him. "You were patient when I needed patience. You were gentle when I needed gentleness. You were strong when I needed strength. You showed me that trust did not have to lead to pain, that love could be safe and steady and real. You made me believe in myself again," Zachary said, his voice rough with emotion. "You looked at a broken mountain man and saw someone worth loving. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose beyond just surviving." They stood by the creek as stars emerged overhead, holding each other close. Caroline thought about the girl she had been terrified, broken, convinced she would never trust again. That girl could never have imagined this life, this love, this deep and abiding peace. "Thank you," she whispered to Zachary, "for seeing past my walls, for earning my trust one gentle day at a time, for loving me even when I was difficult to love." "Thank you for taking a chance on me," Zachary replied, "for letting me prove myself, for building this life with me." They kissed under the stars, and Caroline felt the same flutter in her heart that she had felt on their wedding night so many years ago. Time had changed them, weathered them like the desert weathered stone, but it had also strengthened their bond until it was unbreakable. The years that followed were gentle ones. Zachary and Caroline slowly stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch as Thomas took over more responsibilities. They spent their time with grandchildren, tending Caroline's ever-expanding garden, taking long rides through the desert they both loved. Sarah's children came frequently to visit, and the twins eventually married and started their own families. Creek Valley Ranch became the center of a growing family tree, its branches spreading across Nevada and beyond. In the evenings, Caroline and Zachary would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, as they had done for over 2 decades. They would talk about their day, their children and grandchildren, memories of the past and hopes for the future. Sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, just being together, which was its own form of communication after so many years. "You have any regrets?" Zachary asked one evening when they were both in their 50s, their hair more gray than dark now. Caroline considered the question seriously. "I regret that my parents never got to meet you, never got to see their grandchildren. I regret the years I spent locked in fear after they died. But I do not regret anything that happened after I met you. Every moment, even the difficult ones, led us here." "I feel the same," Zachary said, reaching for her hand, their fingers intertwined with the ease of long practice. "I would not change a single thing about our life together." As they aged, their love only deepened. They knew each other's thoughts, could communicate with a glance, finished each other's sentences. They had weathered storms together, celebrated triumphs, grieved losses, and through it all, their bond had only strengthened. When Caroline turned 60, the whole family gathered for a celebration. Children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren filled the ranch house. Looking around at all the faces, at the life that had sprung from the love between her and Zachary, Caroline felt overwhelmed with gratitude. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Caroline found Zachary sitting on the porch, looking out at the dark desert. She settled beside him, and he automatically put his arm around her shoulders. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "I am thinking about how lucky I am," Zachary said. "I was a broken man when I met you, Caroline. I had given up on happiness, on connection, on everything except survival. You changed all that. You let me love you, and in doing so, you taught me to love myself again." "We healed each other," Caroline said softly. "I was just as broken as you were. Maybe more so, but we put each other back together, piece by piece, day by day." "One gentle day at a time," Zachary agreed, echoing his words from so many years ago. They sat together under the stars, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from the ruins of their pasts. The orphan who had trusted no one and the mountain man who had earned that trust, one gentle day at a time, until trust became love and love became a lifetime. As they aged into their twilight years, Caroline and Zachary remained devoted to each other. They watched their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They saw Creek Valley Ranch expand beyond anything they had originally imagined. They witnessed the new century bring changes to Nevada and the West, but their love remained constant. In their final years, when age had slowed their bodies but not their spirits, they still took walks together along the creek. They still held hands and talked for hours. They still looked at each other with the same love that had sustained them through decades of marriage. When Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Caroline grieved deeply, but without despair. She had been blessed with over 40 years of marriage to a man who had kept every promise he ever made to her. He had earned her trust and never once betrayed it. He had loved her gently and steadily until the very end. Caroline lived another 5 years after Zachary's death, surrounded by the family they had created together. She spent her final years writing in journals, recording their story for future generations. She wanted her descendants to know that love was possible even after tragedy, that trust could be rebuilt, that gentleness and patience could heal the deepest wounds. When Caroline Ingram died at the age of 82, she was laid to rest beside her beloved Zachary on a hillside overlooking Creek Valley Ranch. Their children and grandchildren gathered to say goodbye, celebrating a love story that had begun with fear and suspicion, but had bloomed into something extraordinary. The orphan who had trusted no one had found a mountain man who earned that trust one gentle day at a time, and together they had built a legacy of love that would endure for generations. Their story lived on in the ranch they had created, in the family they had raised, in the example they had set of what true love could be when nurtured with patience, respect, and unwavering commitment. And in the quiet moments at Creek Valley Ranch, when the wind whispered through the trees and the creek tumbled over ancient stones, those who listened closely could almost hear the echo of two souls who had found each other in the vast Nevada desert and created something beautiful that would never truly die. Their love had transformed them both, healing old wounds and creating new joy, proving that even the most broken hearts could be made whole again through gentleness, patience, and trust, built one precious day at a time.